Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Danny Smith, Executive Vice President and co-owner of Color ID, one of the world's leading integrators of advanced identity solutions. Welcome to Color ID's Credential and Identity Security Forum series, continuing the conversation. Today's session is titled Where Physical Identity Management is Headed, and is the third in a series of 3 live sessions that will run each Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Each session generally lasts 60 minutes, and to provide attendee flexibility, each session will repeat once again in the second forum series, beginning next Wednesday on May 27th. So please feel free to invite your colleagues from your organization or anyone you know across the identity industry who would benefit from participating in the forum series. A registration link is located on our website at colorid.com. There you'll find a drop-down titled Webinars. At the beginning of today's session, there'll be a Menti poll to learn more about the common challenges you, the audience, are now experiencing. It's simple to do. You just open a browser on a PC or a mobile, go to Menti, that's MENTI.com, and then type in a 6-digit code on your screen. We'll give you more the code and explain more about that during the presentation. Well, you know, it's really nice that we've been able to develop such meaningful relationships over the past 20 years. And we're incredibly grateful that we can come together today and stay connected. And once again, we have a large group of identity industry attendees joining us from all over the world: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, and Australasia. And so as we say, whoever you are and wherever you may be, we welcome you. And we hope that you find the investment of your time a great value and encourage you to be interactive in these sessions. Leading today's technical discussion will be David Stahlsmith, Director of Product Management for Color ID. Now, David brings a wealth of technical information from over 14 years of working with advanced identity solutions. And of course, many of you know and have worked with David over the years as he works closely with manufacturers, vendors, and end users to promote the understanding of the complicated products and services that comprise our identification industry. He's contributed to the decision-making process at many universities, healthcare facilities, large corporations, and government agencies as they have considered acquiring contactless, smart card, mobile ID, and biometric systems. And since 2006, David has presented annually at many national conferences across North America and in Europe. And David's also been the keynote speaker for full-day identity summits hosted by some of the most prominent universities in North America. And joining David on today's session as moderator is Mark Deegan, Color ID's corporate marketing manager. In addition to managing Color ID's marketing department for the past 16 years, Mark also juggles the duties of account representative for some of our most strategic partners, both customer and corporate. He's also the project manager for Color ID's banking-related customers. Mark and David's technical knowledge concerning advanced identity solutions is a testament to their commitment to our industry and is a great example of the value differential Color ID employees bring to our customer and our corporate partner relationships. Now, just a few housekeeping items will get started. We're really encouraging these sessions to be as interactive as possible, so please utilize the question box to submit questions, and all questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation during the Q&A. In addition to asking questions, you'll also see live polls throughout the presentation, so please be sure to participate in those and be as prompt as possible. Also, please note Color ID's entire business development team is listening in on today's session and are available for any questions or follow-up discussions. Just call or email your account manager, or you can reach us at support@colorid.com. Also, reminder that anyone who completes the 3-session forum will receive a certificate of completion and a Color ID swag bag filled with some nice items. Color ID can confirm everyone's attendance, so you don't have to do anything regarding that. However, each session does require separate registration, so please make sure you register for all the future sessions. Thanks again, everyone, for the privilege of your time and allowing us to come together and stay connected. Now I'm going to turn this over to Mark and David to get started. David?
Thanks, Danny, and welcome everyone. Let's kick this right off with a poll. A pretty squishy question and a word cloud for you to participate in.
All right. So, everybody, please travel to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. Use the code 79. Oh boy, just went away there for a second. 79636. Once you enter that code, you're going to see a question pop up. What are your thoughts on identity management since COVID-19? And as people start submitting their answers, you're going to see the answers fly up on the screen here, and we'll go through those as we see them. And yeah, we'll start getting in some now. Lagging. Needs to be more agile. Mine has not changed much. Well, that's awesome. Touchless. Okay. Important. Coming. Yeah. A lot of different variations in this group from today. Unforeseen. Haphazard. Yeah, we're just trying to go through the motions, try to do it as best we can, I imagine. Challenging. Okay, somebody else has said challenging. When you see the words bigger and in bold, that's what generally someone else has agreed with that same statement. Let's see here, what else? The haphazard one, that one's interesting. I think that's something that a lot of us can probably relate to. So, all right, cool. I think this is probably a good stopping point for the Menti, and yeah, we'll jump into it.
All righty. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that first poll, and we will have some more questions on another word cloud. But you know, we're often when we're talking about identity, it's about ID cards and the badge. But what we're realizing, what we're hearing from customers across many markets and have been for a number of years, and I think it's going to accelerate. I think this whole COVID-19 thing has brought a lot of stuff that was sort of lying in the background dormant. We were getting by using systems, and because so much has changed so rapidly, I think that we will be reevaluating, replacing, deactivating systems that we don't need or that need to be upgraded or replaced at a quicker pace than we might have otherwise. It just sort of feels that way. We'll see what happens. But I'm specifically talking about identity management, not just ID cards today. First of all, we did another session on ID cards a couple weeks ago, but managing IDs is actually a world of its own, and how we manage them affects how well everything works that we use those identities for. And just to name 3 types of identity that we're very familiar with, we have a digital identity. It's a username, a password to log into your bank account. It could be a 2-factor identity. You exist. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the digital identity. That's how you get into your computer. I'm sorry, confused that with financial for a moment there. Your digital identity, very important. All the resources you get on your network, your internet, your company resources. Financial identity is represented by your banking card, and again, a username and password into your account, and however you use those credentials to make financial transactions. But that's a very financial identity for that industry and suite of services they provide. Physical identity is at the bottom of this list, which is often where it is considered in terms of identities. I mean, people in the digital world barely consider physical ID. I mean, they just, the IT guys just hardly get the ID card in most cases. Now, there are exceptions, but a lot of times, physical ID is just not on their radar, and I think that's going to be changing. So that silly movie that came out a few years ago, Identity Theft, and the idea at that time, it's already a few years ago, and it was in our brains, man. Our financial identities are going to get ripped off. People are going to take our cards, and we found out that the card issuers don't require us to make payments when somebody steals our card number and uses it to buy stuff if we report it in time. And in most cases, even if it takes a while, in most of the issuers, the banks want us to keep using our cards, and they want us to know that they've got our backs. So financial identity, there's a number, but there's a whole kind of insurance, we've got your back sort of system in place there that we've been working with the banks and debit and credit cards for years. So we've learned maybe it's not such a big vulnerability, not because there's not a chance that numbers will get stolen, but because the industry itself says we'll take care of you when that happens. Over in physical identity, though, you take up space. we inhabit bodies. We we walk around, we drive cars, we do stuff, and we interact with other systems physically. We open doors, we log into networks. That's a digital thing, but you have to type, and then point of sale, you make purchases. We have teams and membership where we actually at some day again will go into a gym and do stuff, or we ride transit. And the thing is about physical identity that is different than those digital identities, especially the financial, is when there's a breach, it's serious in the physical world. Somebody has come in to take something, break something, or another way violate something, and it can't just be fixed by issuing a new number, sending you a new credit card in the mail. So physical identity is very secure. It's very serious business, and we need to make sure that it's looked after. Now, the government and agencies really have a lot of restrictions in place, regulations around digital data. And if you are involved in IT at any of these things, it's a big deal. You have to have privacy regulation compliance. You have to have security compliance. All these things. And if you don't provide a product or service that fits those parameters, you're not even going to make a sale. You're not going to be able to provide your service. Or if something changes, you have to update it. But at the physical side, it's just not that well regulated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as anyone understands that just because there's not a regulation doesn't mean there's not a risk. And a good example of that was Home Depot had a well-publicized data breach several years ago, and there was an audit, and the audit, which was required as part of their restoration of compliance, went through, looked at everything they did, and they discovered they were using low frequency proxy cards, which in that session a couple of weeks ago, I pointed out, and many of you know, are very low security, like no security. And that's what they were using everywhere to open their doors and log in, and probably time clocks, all kinds of stuff. And so they had to replace those. In other words, they had put convenience over security, and the audit required that they restore security in a position higher than convenience. So they had to up, it wasn't that, it wasn't nothing, but they had to get new cards, and they had to get new readers for those cards. And if you're trying to protect networks, but anybody can walk in the door and get to the server because it's a proxy card that is no key, essentially, then that's a problem. And as we're in this talk, I'm looking forward as I'm preparing this. We're looking, where is physical identity headed? And not too many years ago, back in the mid 2000s, the federal government, in response to the events of the unprecedented events of 9/11, instituted a very secure ID card for government employees. They called it the PIV, the Personal Identity Verification, and it mirrored the CAC, the Common Access credential for the Department of Defense. And it's very expensive, and they put a great big fancy system in place to guarantee security up and down throughout the organization. The first FIPS 201, there was a letter signed by the president. FIPS 201 was an industry processing standard that was put in place to govern this. NIST built all the regulations around it and guidelines and protocols. It was for the executive branch only. Over 2 million people carry these PIV cards, and then the CAC, the Department of Defense, carries who knows how many more. And they have all kinds of crazy cryptography and features, and it looked like this was going to be a way forward for high security and convenience and all kinds of wonderful security and features and in the identity world. And so there was a lot of effort poured into this, which of course the federal government paid for. It was interesting because after all this work and these cards that effectively cost $150 a piece, because of the whole infrastructure and the background check and everything involved there, all this was built for the federal government, and that those concepts and those products and those services, they're there, and they could be replicated in the private sector and other areas of our economy and around the world, but they haven't very much. So the government maintains this very high security, well cryptographically sealed environment for their identities, which are In the digital world, they're quite well used. In the physical world, they're still not fully adhering to the protocols required by the standards over 10 years later. So, you know, if you make it too hard and you make it too expensive, even when you do build it and somebody pays for it, it's not necessarily going to go very far. Here's the PIV card. It's tamper proof because it has that cryptography. All the data is in that chip and you can't get at it or change it. And every place you use that card knows your status. So, you know, there's a lot of good stuff there. It just was difficult and expensive. And so it didn't quite catch on outside of those very large organizations that were able to fund its development. Um, in the IT world, speaking of digital resources, identity and access management is very familiar to IT people. IAM, and there are a lot of products. Microsoft has made them. SailPoint is a very popular product and service these days for managing these digital identities. What's going on when you log in? What can you get to? What can you change? All that stuff. And these are even beginning to reach out of the digital world into the physical world a little bit, but there's still some stuff in the middle there that's not all that connected yet. And I do mention this in most of my talks, and that is there are all these temporary identities or in and around most organizations that are just not well addressed because they're not employees, they're not students. They may or may not be contractors. You know, they may not even have a financial connection to your organization. But if they're coming in and out of your doors or they're hanging around your sites, uh, you may need to know something about them. You know, a little vetting, who they are, can they be here for a certain period of time? You know, all these things around who's involved in your processes on your locations. And just because you don't have a system in place doesn't mean that maybe you should, you know. So always having something in mind about visitors and temporary identities, you know, as we're talking about managing identity. Mark, let's go to this poll.
Absolutely, Dave. First poll, everybody. What system do you use to manage identity? Please select one. We'll start seeing the votes coming in. Thank you all for being prompt on this. I'll flip it around here in a moment and go over the results with you all. All right, perfect. I'm gonna close it down. Okay, everybody, so we got 47% of you have your access control system. 21% has their HR system, and then we had a 16% tie with the IT group has a system. We get just enough to print badge, and then we just try to keep up with making cards. So interesting, most of you doing the PAC system. I think that's what we were probably anticipating, right, Dave?
Yeah, that is the case. I mean, that not quite half. Sometimes I would expect even higher. You make badges in your access control system, and then that's where they get used, really, mostly in a lot of organizations. If you get an ID card, it's your physical identity, and it's pretty much just to get you in and out of doors. Maybe that information gets over to the time clocks. When you hand out cards, when you allow people into your system, maybe even when HR is getting started, you have to verify identity somehow. Now, you may have very low verification requirements. You know, that maybe, but I mean, that's up to the organization. How are you going to manage verifying who comes in? Well, a lot, I found, you know, you Google HR office. I wanted an image here, and I got this little site. I thought, okay, maybe that's a lot of people's HR experience. Sorry if you're in HR. But anyway, oh, university, sorry. This is a slide that I use when I present to university groups also. But this all applies. If you're establishing identity, if you're verifying a person early in the process of when they're joining or coming on board, how do you know who they are? And offices have many channels for validating new hires, new people joining an organization. They may apply for a job. it's a self-service process. They send an email, they make a phone call, maybe they send snail mail, and then maybe there's emailing or just mailing going back and forth, email or snail mail. That establishes an identity and some kind of either digital or geographic location. And then at some point, if it's an employee, they're going to get paid. So there's probably a direct deposit setup or something around the finances, and that's another way of sort of verifying there's another channel with this identity associated with it. And it's not at all unusual. You do background checks, so that can return a lot. So there are, most organizations have thought about this, and nobody wants to hire a person that's going to cause trouble or not work out. So there are often at least some, if not all, of these processes in place. Once that's done, then the identity data comes over, like we just saw, the HR system sends us what we need. It comes over to where you make the cards, and you got to get a card in their hand. Well, obviously the last 2 months, you got maybe you think about making a card. You're going to get a card in their hand someday soon. But that card data is then pushed out to all the various systems. When the card is issued, you print the card, and if there's a number on there that's a prox number, and you use that for parking or door access, and whatever, you make sure those numbers those systems get the numbers they need, so when that card is presented, that person gets what they need from that system. So that's the verification and the issuance, and pretty much everybody does a pretty good job of that. It just gets done. People get the cards they need, and they get the access they need. But the problems occur when things change. Either in midstream, somebody changes to a different department, they need different door access, or when they need to be taken out of the system because they've retired, they've resigned, other things have happened. How do you manage that? And that's where access control systems are okay at, oh yeah, I got to remember somebody sends you an email, so you take them out of their system. It's a manual process. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it is a manual process. And if they're in any other systems, that's going to have to be emails to the people that control those systems to remind them what they need to do about that person. So so the question is managing that identity at a higher level than just each individual system, manually in, manually out, manually change. I mean, number of systems times number of touches per ID card holder can add up, even a small organization, and you might miss one. Somebody stays live in this system, you forgot to get them out of there, all that stuff. And all that conversation I just had with myself there about cards was just about cards. What about what else is coming? Mobile credentials, we're going to talk about that a little later here. And biometrics, we're going to talk about those too. If you're trying to manage any other kinds of credentials or multiple cards, then if you have to do that with each system at each change point in each cardholder's identity life cycle, it's going to be hard to keep up with all that if you don't have some kind of central management system. So that's what we're hearing. There's a need for that. We're and the access control folks often say, well, no, we can handle everything from here. But then you talk to somebody else in the organization and they say, well, we have a hard time getting data from them. It's either an email or we don't get it, or we have a file transfer once a day or something, and so systems, a lot of the systems in place that were designed 20, 25 years ago, they weren't really designed to move data and share data the way modern systems are. Right now, a lot of things are connected via APIs and other stuff. So things that happen when things aren't well connected is, if somebody leaves, you end up with all these expired users. If it's a big organization, I have heard customers say we have thousands or sometimes hundreds of thousands of expired users in our databases. And it's because we have that manual process and we're just not taking them out of there. And the other problem is, if you have all these different systems and your best communication is email, it's hard to get a good view of what's going on across all these different systems in reference to any one individual person. So let's ask this question, Mark.
Alrighty. Has ID verification gotten harder? see what everybody thinks about this one. Perfect. Okay, everybody, here's what we got. 55% of you are saying no, we are using the same processes as ever. 36% of you, we need a better system and now might be the right time. And then 9% of you saying yes, no one can come into our office for verification. There you go. That's a wide spectrum right there. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, very good. And it's not surprising that nothing has really changed that much for a lot of you in terms of processes. I mean, this whole COVID thing's only a couple months old. And I'm not pretending to predict the future and saying yes, but in 2 or 3 months, it's all going to change. No, I don't think that's the case. I just think that there are processes that have been around for a long time, and there will be, at some point, technology turns over, kind of like a lake in the spring. The cold is through the whole lake, and then it warms up on top, and at some point, or is it the fall? Tells you what kind of great fisherman I am. Well, when the lake turns over, you go fishing, and it's because of the change in the season. So I'm just wondering if we're seeing something like that kind of change coming in identity, that there will be some processes. Let's talk a little bit about biometrics and get away from the lake in the country. Just because biometrics have come up, and now they're on our phones, they're all over. Just very briefly, a primer on biometrics. It's you measure different parts of the body or behaviors. You present something to a sensor, or the sensor catches some kind of information, and then it captures an image or some kind of motion. It converts it to a template. The template is a number, and then the template can be matched, and the templates are stored in a one-way, or they run through a one-way hash algorithm, so that they can't be replicated in reverse if it's done properly. So if you know the template, you cannot reconstruct the image. It's only just a number representing that image. And then, of course, if it's properly stored, it's encrypted too. So templates should be secure once they're created from biometric images or behaviors. Then once you have that template, there are a couple different ways of matching. Let's talk about one-to-one. So you have here a fingerprint, and their number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is, let's say that's the template number that represents that fingerprint. And there's the template representing the fingerprint. And when you walk up to a sensor, you present your fingerprint again. We'll just imagine that it's a touchless fingerprint sensor right now, and you present your fingerprint. It creates a number on the spot. It matches that against numbers in the database. If they match or are close to matching, then that scanner will grant access through the system so that you get where you need to go. In one-to-many matching, that is where you have a number representing the biometric image, and that's a template, and you see that there in blue. And when you present, in this case, your iris to a camera, and it takes a picture of your eye, and it sees all that very colorful and variegated information in the iris itself, creates a number. And if that's the number it creates, then that's not a matching iris. And if that doesn't match, that doesn't match, or that one does match. So in this case, it's looking for the same or very similar number to the one that was captured and created at enrollment. So one-to-many is very useful in larger in implementations where a bunch of people are going through a door, for example. And if you want to do one-to-one, you would have to present a card, pull that record, and then match the template just captured to the one that the card referenced that came from the database. That's one-to-one. It takes more time. It's a quicker match in some cases, but you do have to have that usually second factor authentication. In one-to-many, you just walk up, You look in the device, you present your fingerprint, whatever it is, and if you match, it does hopefully a quick search of the database and you get the access you need. There's also one other concept about this stuff that is important around biometrics and really any kind of database matching. But if for example, this is physical access, you do not want false acceptance. That is bad. And so, because that means you would be accepting someone who is not in the database because your system identified them as someone who is in the database. So either the sensors aren't good or the person somehow scammed it. So that's false acceptance. So you have to set that threshold high, so very few people get through. But then on the other side, the false rejection, where your boss can't get through the door with the biometric sensor 1 out of 2 times, that's false rejection, because they should be able to come through that door every time they approach it. And if the sensor is rejecting them, that's false rejection, and that's frustrating. So you have to get those things aligned. Now, the phone fingerprint thing's very well established. If you have a Samsung phone, maybe you're using iris. Some phones now have facial recognition. So it's all built, it's all very familiar to us. And we're using them almost without thinking about it. I have a fingerprint sensor on my phone. I just don't even think. I just touch it, boom, it opens up, and it works. But it's one-to-one. It's my fingerprint template that's stored in the phone. So it doesn't have to be a really close match, it just has to be pretty close. Close enough, because it's not searching a database of 1,000 records to see if this is my fingerprint rather than somebody who has one similar to mine. If it's pretty close and I'm holding the phone says, yeah, that's good enough for me. And so this is an indication of maybe the sensor isn't as fabulous perhaps as the one shown in the right here on the picture, where there's a subdermal light that's shown into the finger and can register the shape of the structure of your skin under the very outside layer. So it can be much more accurate and read a lot more data than just the basic fingerprint itself. Well, the phone fingerprint doesn't have all that. That device, it's not that expensive, but it's good enough for your phone. So you have to get a good enough sensor that it will behave well where you're using it and provide you with the level of security and convenience that you both need. Morpho Wave is a pretty cool device. If you've seen this in action, that's a good picture of it right there. And you just wave your hand through that slot and it captures your fingerprints right away, and it's fast. It is not inexpensive. It's not brutal, but I mean, you pay for what you get there, and it does a good job, and it has access control connections for it. Iris recognition is still regarded by pretty much everybody who pays much attention to this stuff as the best secure biometric available. It has several things in its favor. There's just so much data in the iris itself. There's so much variation. It doesn't replicate between people, and irises don't change unless there's a trauma usually, or something untoward, but in most cases irises stay the same and are visible for a long time. They have circles, which are very mathematically identifiable shapes. So the algorithm goes and looks for a circle, and it builds its its template using the geometry of the circle. So it's a very good method for identification, especially if security and speed are important to you. Now, I've talked about the ones that have been around for a while, fingerprint and iris. The one that's been around forever, literally in human history, is facial recognition. We look at people and we recognize them almost always immediately because of their face. We recognize their faces. Sometimes we don't even, in the low light, we might recognize the way they move their face, even if we can't fully see their features. I mean, humans are very good at identifying other human beings by their faces. So this is built deep into our humanness, this facial recognition, and we want to do it this way. And so when when we started inventing machines to recognize faces, everybody got really excited about it, and there are lots of reasons for that. You don't have, I mean, it's a camera, it takes a picture. Now it may be a 3D camera, it may be has varying wavelengths of light, that illuminate the face, all the different ways that people are trying to capture faces to get more accuracy. um, but basically it's a picture of a face. And when it first came out, when facial recognition as a security process was introduced, at first everybody was excited about it, and because there are surveillance cameras everywhere. If you can recognize a face from a surveillance camera, you don't even have to talk to people. You can just get their pictures and recognize them. Well, it wasn't quite as good for a long time as everybody hoped. So the hopes were deferred, but it has been getting a lot better in the last few years for sure. And you know, if you're coming in and out of borders, if you're in a crowd, forensic situations, government agencies have expensive software, and they're getting pretty good at figuring out who people are digitally by reviewing their faces. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. I mean, I just as I was preparing this, I went to Google Photos, which is where I load our family photos, and I typed my son's name. Now, I typed another person's name that I knew, but she's very young and she doesn't have any online accounts yet. So Google gave me no results. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I typed my son's name, and he has a bunch of online accounts, and Google knows who he is. And they know the pictures of my son, Daniel, both recent photos and photos I've uploaded when he was a kid. I didn't do anything else. I just put Daniel into my Google photo, in the browser there. And these are the photos I got. I got a lot more too. I mean, it's kind of cool. It's kind of creepy. So Google is, linking Daniel, my name, my account with his name, his accounts, and then also using facial recognition in there to some extent, because some of these photos were not digitally, a lot when he was little, there was no Google Photos at that time. Those were scanned later and entered just as scans, and then Google picked them up. So Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, right? The face is the thing. So if you're looking to get people through a door, here is one of a bunch of different facial recognition devices. The reason that this is attractive right now is because they very quickly, Invixion very quickly incorporated a temperature sensor into this thing. So when you look into the camera, it's taking a picture of your face, it's doing facial recognition, it has Wiegand output and network connections, all that stuff that a access control device should have. But it also is taking your temperature, and it keys in on the tear duct in your eye, which is evidently a very accurate place to probe with an infrared light and record temperature. So this is available if you want, and it has video streaming. So if you're looking for a way to put a device out on the door that can grant access based on facial recognition and take temperatures of people entering, and if they take their temperature and it's 102 and they go, oh boy, and they walk away, you have a video stream of that. You can review that. It also contains a fingerprint reader and a vein pattern reader if you want that finger vein. Pretty much everything in the world can come loaded onto this thing, but it is an impressive little device, and does all that for not a crazy price. One thing about, I mentioned earlier about the facial and the ability to capture photos involuntarily. The discussion around biometrics has been around usefulness and privacy, and security, and all those things are kind of mixed up. Now, we're in a time right now where things like privacy are kind of getting pushed off to the side because we have other things that seem more important. But just to, for the record, if you're using biometrics and you need really high security, you You don't need it for everybody. You can put in a closed system. You can put in really good sensors. You don't need to share your data outside that system. So that's a really good approach. And nobody should have much of a problem with the privacy in that kind of system. It's for purpose, and it's closed and unto itself. But if you're going with video cameras and surveillance, then you may or may not have to grapple in some way with voluntary versus involuntary. Well, it's security. We want to know who's walking around our building. Okay, but is there any boundary to that, or is it anybody all the time anywhere? So, just discussions. They've been going on around biometrics for a long time, and I expect they will continue to be discussed, but there may come a time, and maybe very soon, where, like I said, the privacy issue perhaps just slides off because expediency and require for security is higher. Here's a iris camera being used in a university dining hall. They got tired of swiping cards. They may or may not have a person come out and look at the point of sale register, but everybody here, they just walk up, it takes their picture, and in they go. That's a way of moving a lot of people through an entrance pretty quickly. It is that same security that is used for data centers around the world for Google, Amazon, a lot of companies use iris for the doors on their data centers. You can also use fingerprints and other things, and you can add card plus iris, or you can add pin plus iris, or card plus pin plus iris. You can ramp this way up, but in a lot of data centers, iris, like I said, the security of iris is still highly regarded, is often used there. Let's go to a poll, Mark.
Thanks, Dave. Alrighty, let's see if I can get this. Okay, everybody, do you use biometrics? See what type of reaction we get here. I'll let this go for a moment as you guys vote. Perfect. Here we go, everybody. 44% have never used biometrics. 22% fingerprint for some doors. 17% have iris for high security access. 11% have a system, but it got old. 6% are using the hand geometry for time and attendance. Very cool. Okay. Well, Dave, I think I was probably expecting a lower number on never used biometrics. What about you?
No, it's a little less than half is not unexpected, because just a lot of enterprises never got into it. If you needed them with security, in some cases it was convenience. I think the hand geometry and the fingerprint right now are being disdained a little bit because everybody's concerned about the contact. And we've had some requests like, hey, what do we have? What options do we have? If you've used fingerprint in the past and had a lot of 15 years ago, a lot of door fingerprint sensors were not very good. And so a lot of those either got thrown out or sidelined. And whenever you talked about fingerprint, later, people with that experience said, oh, that's just junk. Well, there are really good sensors. They're not necessarily terribly expensive. It's, the technology keeps getting better. And then there are other systems also for it. But let's go into the future now, where we are now and moving forward, having covered where we've been. And we talked about the card security levels a couple weeks ago. Magstripe, Prox, MyFair, iClass, Desfire EV1, Desfire EV2, CIOS, all those things. So cards are still going to be around. Cards are part of our world. We have readers, we have systems that support cards. If you're going through doors, cards are still going to be around for a long time. So I just wanted to put this in here. This is not going away without a fight. The systems are in place. But in your pocket is a very powerful computer, probably in your hands right now. And it has a network, it has network connections, it has geolocation services, it has a really excellent user interface, it has all kinds of inputs, and it has highly developed support, both the operating system running on your phone and the whole world of apps that they're companies compete for you to install and do all kinds of crazy stuff with. Phones are not going away, and as younger people take positions to make decisions within organizations, their world of everything around the mobile will affect their decisions. And so we're going to have a lot more talk about phones and mobile stuff in the next number of years. I don't know exactly what the time frame is. It's been coming on for a while, and it has sort of not gotten too near the physical access world yet. Some of the companies have products, we've talked about that, but phones are a big deal. I mean, if you're in financial tech or if you're in marketing, you're all about phones. And Apple Pay and Google Pay created wallets. They have tokens that they issue to your phone so that your credit card is never seen by any merchant, the token that they create. So these are very complicated infrastructures they've created to support your phone for free to you. I mean, you don't see the fee that's built into the back end for payments, but these are enormous markets compared to opening doors. Using financial cards or phones for financial transactions, the stuff that's going on around marketing around phones are vast. Opening doors and cards I mean, it's important, you got to have it, but the amount of money and the amount of energy spent on phones in marketing and financial, for example, is just enormous compared to what we deal with in physical security. So when you start getting closer into where, really ID specific stuff where financial meets physical, an example is the Aadhaar project in India. The Unique Identification Authority of India has now enrolled well over 1.1 billion ID numbers in their system. So these are just about everybody in India has an Aadhaar number, and now they're issuing virtual tokens, just like Apple Pay. So if you had an Aadhaar number created sometime in the last few years, now you can get a 16-digit ISO number mapped to your Aadhaar number, and it will be stored on your phone. So all you need is your Aadhaar number that you were originally set up with, and you either present, look familiar, fingerprint or iris, or mobile, one-time password on mobile, something like Duo, and then you can get that new ISO number and use that for financial transactions in this whole system. This is a large country that's spent a lot of effort developing it. I mean, originally it was just an enormous contract, I don't know, 6-8 years ago, and they developed biometrics. The goal was to enroll everybody in India into this system, and everybody would have a public ID, and it would be for both distribution of financial resources and everything else that you needed to touch anything in India, essentially. So mobile, they've added that mobile capability for a vast system. Then some other stuff going on with with mobile HID is they come up a lot in these discussions because they go out and they buy a lot of other companies that make interesting stuff. So one of the things they have going right now is called trusted tags, and a trusted tag is an NFC chip or tag, and you can put it anywhere. I mean, it's great for guard tours, for example, and maybe it just has a URL on it, something that triggers when your phone gets near it. Touch that tag, it opens a browser on your phone, and the browser immediately connects to the HID service. It knows where you are. It can issue an authentication token. And then if you have a management platform, it can return that token to that management platform. It knows where somebody was, and it's all within that system. So you don't have to go to Google, and you don't have to go to Google and do an API connector to Google Maps and all that stuff. They've done all this for you, and the whole thing is initiated with a trusted tag. Doesn't even require an app on your phone. Pretty clever stuff. Here's one, ultra wideband. HID again is talking about this, but other companies are too. Noticeably missing in the consortium members in this, at least in this one that I found, is Apple. And anything, Apple is about NFC, and this is Well, it's about NFC and Bluetooth. So we'll see if they get involved. Samsung is there, the other big phone company, HID, Allegion, locks and doors, and NXP, who makes chips. So that all makes sense. The point is that this is going to be a whole back-end system for tracking your phone, ultra wideband, knowing where your phone is with incredible accuracy. The FIRA is fine range, FIRA, so that now you don't have to have a card. You don't even necessarily have to hold your phone up to a reader. As you approach the door, it knows where you are and it communicates to the system and it unlocks the door. So this is a back-end server approach using the ultra wideband technology. We'll see where it goes. HID is talking about it. It's just an example. It's phone. It's about the phone. And it here's the from the FIRA consortium, they're looking at everything: smart homes, smart cities, transportation, logical access, gaming, smart retail, healthcare industry. We'll see how this goes. I mean, we've all seen these charts for technology before, but this one is around what's on your phone. It's about the phone. So if we're trying to manage mobile credentials, maybe you have some biometrics, all that stuff. I've talked about Card Exchange Cloud. It's an identity management platform that can help you manage all this kind of data and the credentials and the life cycle of those credentials. Because like I said at the beginning of our session today, you exist within your organization. You have a start and you have an end, and there's stuff happens in the middle, and you need a way to manage all that. The credentials, which systems, what credentials, are they biometric, are they card, are they mobile? And with the change to mobile that I've been describing, and then anything related to facial, how are those how are identities tied to facial templates managed? Is there any management there, or is it just a bunch of images and you just do searches? There are ways to manage credentials and their life cycles. Card Exchange Cloud is one of those. Again, it's cloud. It will work with your card printing system. It can connect to your mobile system. It will provide a lot of things for you. Swift Data Pinwheel, again, a managed database service that will connect. It was primarily built to connect to your access control systems and connect to the other data the other systems that need data. It sits in the background. You don't have to do a lot with this. You set it up and it runs, and it makes sure data gets where it needs to go within your organization. And then there's a totally comprehensive approach, which is brought by a company called Unifia. Unifia is a brand new company. They've built a very robust and comprehensive identity management platform with a lot of different features. It verifies identities at the beginning of the life cycle. It manages logical access. It can connect to physical access systems. It has biometric support, and it has self-service. So all of this is built into the Unifia platform that will connect to things. But very importantly, Unifia, being a brand new product, recognizes mobile has to be very much towards the front of whatever they're offering. So you register the device, you create your identities on your mobile phone. You can see what your activities have been. You get one-time password through this service. It can support PKI if you need that, and it can handle multiple identities. So all of this from your phone. The phone is key. And then here's how, if you want to identify, you want to authenticate, you want to authorize, you want to grant access, all of this is through the Unifia platform, and mostly it's going to be through the phone. That's their favored mode. And here, showing how much thought they've put into all the cryptographic services that are required to keep the communication and the credentials secure in the background. So, what used to be good enough for access control, Wiegand wires that are have it's just wide open data in the clear, and a lot of what goes on in the older access control systems, it just wasn't designed with, for example, cryptographic security that is now available. Systems like this are looking into the future, and they're, just look at all the different acronyms on this page, that they're doing their homework to provide the security that will be needed for the next 20 years. So all that going on, we get to the chart that Color ID looks at all that stuff I just talked about, and we try to imagine how could any one organization of any size at all really handle all that, because it's so many different types of credentials, so much data, so many different access points. And so that's where we, like I mentioned with card exchange, we see something like that as an identity manager. In other words, a service of its own that then can feed the databases, the access control system. It can send data to be printed in whatever your printing system is, or be directly connected to the printing system. And then can it also manage mobile or even biometric credentials and their whole life cycles? So the point here of this chart with all that's going on is that the admin, represented by the screen there on the left, connects with the management layer instead of having to connect individually with everything else on this page. Once you've connected, once that management is configured and connected, that then manages, it becomes your friend, your helper in managing these identities across your whole organization. So anyway, having explained all that, that's as far as I can get in an hour on what we see coming in credentials and identity management.
Thanks, Dave.
Mark, I'll let you field questions.
Absolutely, and lucky you, there are quite a few questions to be answered. So we've got an active group today. So let's just kick it off. First question is, how long do you think people will be carrying ID badges for access?
That's a good question. I mean, the hardware, prox readers last forever, nearly, it seems. I do know of instances where they fail, but and panels last a long time. But and so it isn't usually until some kind of like server upgrade that requires the software to be upgraded, or some kind of new project that arrives with some new money, where you replace enough, or you put in enough new panels that it then makes sense to upgrade everything else. Yeah, so cards are going to be used as long as all that infrastructure is in place, unless perception changes. And if it does, if people go, these prox cards aren't really keeping our doors secure, which they're not. I mean, they're keeping them closed, but anybody can clone your prox card and come in that door. If you have the higher quality cards, the newer cards with the cryptographic data, then those, of course, are more secure. But I just think that at some point within the next, I would guess generally 5 to 10 years, probably, everybody's going to say, I want it on my phone. I don't want to have to carry a card. I don't want to issue a card. I don't want people to have to come in and make cards for people anymore. I don't think they'll ever go completely away, but I think the phone thing is just going to become so popular that everybody's going to want it.
Gotcha. Okay, is FIRA the same as frictionless?
Well, I'm sure the people who are working in that consortium would answer yes, and hope that that's the case. It's still very early days. It's still dependent on handsets and networks. So ideally, yes, it would be frictionless. We'll see when it is actually rolled out in products that we can buy. When products show up with part numbers and a price, that's when you actually can get a copy of it and just see how it works. So hopefully they're frictionless. That'd be awesome. But I imagine there'll be a few bumps on that road.
Like with most things, right, in life?
Most things.
Okay, yes. How long does an enrollment process take for when using Iris?
The enrollment for Iris is pretty quick. If you have if you depending on the size of your organization, if you have a separate Iris enrollment camera set up where you print cards, for example, then usually in the time that it takes to print a card, you can enroll somebody in the Iris system. If you're doing it at the camera that's used at the door, it just takes a little longer because you have to communicate with whoever's running the server, or maybe you have it in sort of kiosk mode where you can enroll, with somebody just putting in a pin. But the enrollment itself is quick. It's just capturing a couple photos of your eyes, and then you're in there.
Very cool. Let's see here. Will facial recognition become the only way people are verified in the future, with all the traditional types of ID badges and access control going away?
That's a great question.
Look into the crystal ball, Dave.
Yeah, no. Well, I get the feeling that there are a lot of people in the industry that believe that. And it makes sense. We have cameras everywhere, but not all the cameras are good enough to really do good facial recognition. And I can give you this example. I was at a show which was featured biometrics, high-end government aimed biometric systems just about a year ago, and there was a company there that had a very high-end system, and I enrolled, and they took a bunch of photos of my face from different angles, and then I walked around the other side of their display, and they had a turnstile there, and I walked up to the turnstile and I looked at the camera. When I got to the turnstile, it didn't open. They went, oh, well, that's weird, we'll try it again. So I backed up, I tried it again, it worked. But then, so out of several times, like 3 or 4 times that I tried it, it didn't work twice. So this is facial recognition, good lighting, proper, these are the guys who actually run the system. It wasn't recognizing my face. Now, I don't know, who knows, why, but faces move and lighting changes. So, sometimes, and if you're doing Facebook, if you're doing 2D images, photos, and you can run them through processes, maybe you can do certain kinds of stuff with them. But if you're in a live environment with real faces, it gets harder. And if a door has to open because your face is recognized and you don't want any false positives, or not very many, then you have to set your threshold pretty high. I think facial still has a way to go for access control, and but it keeps getting better, and the cameras are getting better. So again, it would require an infrastructure upgrade wherever you really need high accuracy, because cameras over the last 20 years have improved. So the better cameras we get, the better data, and then the software, and who can pay the money for the better software. It's always going to be the same trade-off. How much can you afford? What kind of security do you need? So I think it's going to be a while before we're in full-on facial. I know using Delta here in Atlanta, where I fly in and out of frequently, went to facial recognition for international travelers, and I watched people walk up and they would capture their photos, and it seemed to generally recognize them. But even if you missed half of 1%, that's somebody standing there either in trouble because they were recognized as somebody else, or they weren't recognized. I mean, it's just, when you go all in on a technology that's maybe not completely reliable. I mean, even Iris at some point has a number where somebody may not be able to be recognized. You just, when you completely, utterly trust the system, what recourse do you have in case there's a problem? So all of that, it's a great big question. Sorry, I've thrown not an answer, just a bunch of ruminations out there, but it is an interesting topic for sure.
Very good. Okay, so going back to the mobile credentials, what happens if someone's mobile phone gets stolen and then there's a mobile credential on it? Can they use that to gain access into that building? What security parameters are built into these apps that helps prevent that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it depends on the system. In HID's system, which is the one I'm most familiar with, you as the user would have to approach whoever manages your security and say, I lost my phone. and turn it off, or if you can log into your system or whatever, however you want to do that. But there has to be a process for notifying somebody that something has changed. Your identity needs to be managed because somebody else has your phone now. So that can be turned off. And then once it is turned off, that license becomes available to be issued to you when you go get a new phone. So you get to use the same license. It doesn't cost your company any money to replace it, but it does require some action. It has to be turned off. Otherwise, unless you had, and it could be company policy, you had enabled access only after logging into your phone or opening lock screen or something. So again, those are policies. If you have it open the door from black screen as the setting, then yeah, that person can walk up and open the door with your phone, just as if he had your Prox card uh, and walked in that door.
Cool, Dave. All right. Well, the hardest question is the last question, Dave, and this is from me. So good luck with this one.
Uh-oh.
So, okay. Dave Stallsmith, you are in charge of security for a very fancy facility. What are you going to use to lock down those doors to offer the highest security for the people there? What are you going with?
That's a good question. Okay. Well, it's fancy, so let's say I have a decent amount of budget. Um, I think my people are going to want it mobile, so I would set up a mobile pilot, just make sure everybody's good with that. Because let's say we're looking forward and we want to move into the future. We don't want to just, we want to get out of whatever we have, if it's Prox or whatever. So I'd like to explore mobile, and we'll run it pilot. We'll see if people like it, and if it catches on and we get good feedback, then we'll implement mobile credentials and readers. If we need, we'll get some kind of credential management system to help manage that, whether it's through our access control system or one of these separate identity management systems we just discussed here. If I have a server room, I'm going to put Iris on it. And if I have any, if it's a healthcare facility and I have nuclear materials or anything else, any bioweapons in the place, then I will put Iris cameras on that, because I do believe in our experience that Iris is the most secure biometric, and I would put a card second factor on that too, at least. In the meantime, while we're testing the mobile, I would make sure I had a good card, because cards do work. They are, they're not that expensive, and they work. And if you get good cards, I'd get a key, an encryption key for our facility that nobody else had, so nobody else could clone our data, and or show up with a card from another facility that shared a general key. But that, as far as credential technology, that's where physical credential technology, that's probably where I would be in those areas.
Okay, I'll accept that. Well done. You passed.
It was a very interesting question. What do you think?
There you go. Okay, well, the previous reminds us does require it. And thank you all so much for attending today's webinar.